Can we geek out about insects for just a second?
Yeah, let's talk about bugs.
Let's talk about bugs. I kind of got interested in insects when I was doing my master's degree because my major professor happened to be studying moths.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you remember when I came back here, and you had been hired after I had graduated.
Yeah.
But I came and visited your lab and said I was maybe interested in a PhD,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't really know insects. I was barely starting to learn them.
Yeah.
But when I saw what your lab was doing with the DNA and some of the other things, I got really excited, and then I applied, and I don't know how you accepted me, but you accepted me.
No, it was too late.
It was too late
Can't do anything about that.
But and BYU let me come, and I remember when I got here, there was this article that you guys were working on that ended up being the cover of Nature.
Yeah.
And at the time, I didn't understand how big of a deal that was. Like I was just like, oh, cool. There's an art. I think you had a crappy photocopy that was pasted up on the board of like, we got the cover, but I didn't think it was that big of a deal. Now I know how big of a deal that was. Could you maybe talk about that one? And then maybe are there any other like just cool evolution of insects that you've discovered over the last year? So, but maybe start with walking sticks.
So let's talk about walking sticks. So the interesting thing about this was a discovery, and it was kind of a happenstance thing, where we were recovering the phylogeny of stick insects, and we were taking a look at the pattern of wings, in the sense that some stick insects have wings, some species do, other species do not, and a striking pattern emerged, which suggested that when stick insects diversified, they diversified after losing wings.
Right.
They diversified for a good 100 million years, and then they got their wings back. Now, this is something which is not supposed to happen in evolution, because the idea is, in order to make wings, you've got to have a whole bunch of genes associated with making the wing, the muscles, the neural connections, all the things which are involved with flight. When wings are gone, those genes are supposed to accumulate mutations, and you're not supposed to get that complex feature back. Well, this was an example, and really the first confirmed example where complexity could be maintained over long evolutionary periods within the genes, even though it wasn't expressed on the phenotype.
Right.
It's been, in some ways, it's been really nice because just a year ago, there was another analysis of this where they added a lot more genomic data, more sophisticated analyses, and the answer was still the same.
Still pretty much the same,
Yeah, it's the same sort of story. The thing which was interesting about this is that this was co-occurring the exact same time that the DNA in the Book of Mormon thing was exploding.
Oh.
So I had published in Nature 3 weeks before I was responding to the DNA Book of Mormon within a public forum. And I can remember that because that gave an air, it at least gave me a little bit of believability that I was a scientist and knew what I was doing.
Yeah.
So you call that coincidental, call that a blessing, call it whatever you want to call it.
So, I mean, this is a big deal because to have something that complex that goes away, now it doesn't evolve brand new again. It's like the underlying information and genes are still there. They're just not being flipped on or turned on in a specific way. And they're being maintained perhaps because a lot of those genes are used also to build other stuff of the bug, right? But it's really cool because for 100 and whatever million years, you don't see wings on walking sticks.
And then they come back.
Right? So, I mean, I always teach this now I use this as an example in the classes that I teach. It's really cool. What other really cool, all of your students or yourself, what other cool things have you discovered over the years?
The exciting thing about my lab and what we've accomplished is I think it's fair to say that we really laid the foundation for understanding basic phylogeny, basic patterns of diversity across a very wide range of insect groups.
And why does it matter to lay down the basic phylogeny? Why is that so crucial and important?
If you don't have, what we're trying to do is understand the patterns, right? And once you've got that tree of life for those organisms, then you're able to go in and start asking interesting questions about how they diversified. So coming back to walking sticks, the thought was, Well, all walking sticks which don't have wings belong in a single group, and those with wings belong in a different group. And what you see is a single transformation where wings were lost, right? Well, you would have thought that if you didn't have a phylogeny.
Right.
Once the phylogeny is in place, then that idea goes away entirely, and you're left with a brand new pattern, which suggests that evolution is much more complex, much more interesting than we ever supposed.
Right. Yeah, like even just with the mayflies that we've looked at, we were able to see that the example I think of is like the burrowing mayflies. They used to think that was off on its own branch, but it turns out the burrowing mayflies have the tusked forms and the non-tusked forms, and the non-tusked forms are now embedded way within.
Yeah.
So and I always remember at that very first, did you go to the meeting in Flathead or in Glacier National Park and that? I can't remember.
I'm not sure if
I don't know if you went to that meeting, but that was the first time I presented kind of my research to the mayfly community. Yeah. And I'll never forget, in the back, there were some of the older mayfly community folks there, and they were like, that's not right.
Yeah.
Like, I showed and I'm like, they're like, that's not right. That's not where that's not how the burrowing mayflies work. Yeah. And they came and challenged me on it. I was like, well, that's what the data show. And of course, we've even now gathered way more data, and it continues to show the same pattern. So most of your research then has been, let's find the evolutionary pattern, the tree of these insects, and then we can lay on top of that the evolutionary stories that have occurred.
The diversification, Yeah, and we've done this across a wide range of groups. We've done a lot more research on insects. But, this is exciting, right? So I've had the same experiences where I stand up in front of all these specialists, these people I feared because they were well known in the field, and I say, my data suggests that what you guys have been saying all these years is absolutely wrong, right? And that's exciting to do as a young scientist. But the other thing which is great about this is it shows why science is such a wonderful endeavor.
Yeah.
Because with science, you can have these deeply held, ingrained ideas that specialists have been arguing about for years and years. And then once you collect more data, and once the data demonstrate that those previous ideas were wrong, then they get tossed into the trash bin of science, and you have a new idea to work with.
Yeah.
So just the ability for science to change is really one of the virtues of science.
Yeah, it's a feature, not a bug.
That's right.
Yeah, and it's like there's no other career that constantly has people challenging, what you think. And if you come up with an idea and it's supported by lots of data, and it's different from what the long-held belief was, those are the people that get really famous. I mean, that's the Charles Darwin.
Those are Charles Darwin, yeah. So there is this misconception out there. There's this notion that scientists are all in collusion together. This idea that if you come up with some idea which goes against the norm, that you will be ridiculed and you'll be thrown out and you won't get the grant dollars and you will not be successful and you won't get tenure. What people don't realize is that within the discipline, if you are the person who comes up with the new ideas and you've got data to support those new ideas, the opposite happens. You become famous, you get the grants, you get the students, you get the tenure. So there is actually, within academics, there is built-in incentives to not run with the crowd. Right? But you have to do it carefully, because if you're not running with the crowd and you can't support it, you will be shot down. Right,
exactly. And that attitude of accepting that science is not a conspiracy, it's not a collusion, that science is an honest endeavor to try to just figure out how this world works, I think is a big problem. I think you've seen this problem maybe over the last 4 or 5 or 6 years as well, where it seems like, a lot of my own family and community, don't rely on experts telling us what's really the objective truth reality where we live. How have you combated that, or have you had to deal with this?
I've had the exact same experience, right? Living within this community, especially as we're coming through COVID, right? So I don't know if there's ever been a more frustrating time to be a scientist than during COVID, because as COVID was emerging and scientists were harnessing their tools to try and understand it, they were collecting data, they were forming hypotheses, they were making healthcare recommendations. Now, those healthcare recommendations changed over time as more data were collected. For someone who's a scientist, that's comforting.
Right.
That means, hey, this is the way it should be working. For people who are lay, who are not scientists, it's frustrating because it makes them think, oh, these guys are guessing, they don't know what they're doing anyways. It's not realizing that this is the way that science operates. And so I think it's been a frustrating experience for many people in the science community to see so much anti-science sentiment, which was expressed, not just opinions in the marketplace of ideas, but among people who make policy decisions which really impact the lives of those around them.
Yeah.
To see such an anti-science movement. There continues to be a strong anti-science movement within this community. We just learned about one today.
Right.
Came as a complete shock and a complete surprise.
Right.
Saying, who are these people? What are they doing? And why is it that we never caught sight of this until now? Right.
Yeah.
And I find this really sad because there was a time when science was revered because it was doing things like providing us with clean sanitation and causing polio to go away and doing these things which made everybody's life better.
Right.
But somehow we've entered a phase where the conspiracy theories seem to run in parallel to that which can be demonstrated with evidence, and that they seem to have a voice which is just as strong as the voice of science.
Yeah. And I thought it was such a lost opportunity for the general public to experiment, to watch science happen in real time, because usually what they're accustomed to receiving is the vetted, objective truth that is the scientific consensus that then goes in a textbook. Like that's the kind of science that they were used to.
Yeah.
And then they had this experience during COVID to actually watch science happen in real time and watch how, as more data come in, maybe the ideas change. And I thought, what a great opportunity for the general public. And instead of looking at it as, oh, isn't that wonderful how science works? It was, oh, I can't trust science anymore. I can't trust medical experts.
For many years in our evolution class, we spent time talking about what is science and how do we get to science and what are the methods that science uses. And for many years, we've been warning about this sentiment which has been expressed to the community that it's okay to distrust science. Well, here we are coming out of COVID, and it is really clear that if the public, the politicians had followed the science and the recommendations of the experts in the field, there have been studies which demonstrate there'd be at least 300,000 people whose lives could have been saved.
Yeah.
I don't think we reflect upon the tragedy of this all. Historians are going to write about this period, and I have no doubt that one of the stories which is going to come out of this was the influence of social media in spreading lies and the great tragedy which occurred. 300,000 people, that is hard to fathom. These people had wives, husbands, parents, children. We've all been touched by this through this pandemic. And this was a consequence of not understanding the science and following the science. So it's one thing to say, yeah, my neighbor doesn't believe in evolution, they don't accept evolution, they're kind of crazy, whatever. And that might not make any difference in their lives. But when it comes to these public health measures, these are life and death situations.